The world had narrowed to the feeling of cold granite beneath my thin knees and the relentless bite of the winter wind that snaked its way down the financial district's canyons. Each gust was a serrated knife, slicing through the threadbare fabric of my coat, a coat that had once been elegant, a relic from a life that felt as distant and fictional as a fairy tale. My fingers, numb and stained with city grime, were curled into a fragile cup, extended not in prayer, but in supplication to a river of indifferent shadows. The polished shoes of men and women who carried the warmth of purpose in their strides clicked past me, a syncopated rhythm of a world that had simply moved on. I was not a person to them, I was part of the urban scenery, a human-shaped monument to misfortune, easily ignored. My voice was a hoarse whisper, a broken reed in the symphony of the city. Spare any change? Please. The words were ash in my mouth, each one a small death of dignity. My home was the recessed doorway of a bank, a cruel joke of an irony that did not escape me. I would huddle there, my back against the cold brass of the lock, and try to remember the woman who had once walked through those same doors, her heels confident on the marble floor, her future a gleaming guaranteed thing. That woman was Seraphina. I had not spoken that name in over a year. It belonged to a ghost, a creature of light and laughter who had lived in a sun-drenched apartment filled with the scent of jasmine and the sound of a child's laughter. That ghost was buried under the crushing weight of a single, cataclysmic night, a night of fire and screaming metal and a silence that had followed, so absolute and terrible that it had swallowed my soul whole. My daughter, Alara, with her eyes the color of a summer sky and a laugh that could disarm the sun itself, was gone. And with her, my husband, Kalen, my anchor, my quiet storm. They were not just dead, they were erased from the world, leaving behind a vacuum of such profound darkness that I, Seraphina, had been extinguished within it, leaving only this hollowed-out shell begging for coins. The memory of that night was a fresh wound, always. It was the phone call, the polite, somber voice of a state trooper that had first carved me out. Then, the visit from Kalen's business partner, Ronan. His face, usually a mask of charming confidence, had been pale, etched with a grief I now believed was a masterful performance. He had held my hands, his grip too tight, and told me the terrible news. A car accident. A blowout on a rain-slicked highway. No other vehicles involved. Kalen, ever the vigilant driver, had swerved, overcorrected. The car had wrapped itself around an oak tree. The fire had been instantaneous. He had delivered this horror, and then, with the precision of a surgeon, he had delivered the second blow. The company, the tech startup they had built from their college dorm room, was in peril. Debts I never knew existed had surfaced. Our assets, our accounts, even the life insurance, all were entangled, frozen, or voided due to some obscure clause. He, Ronan, was so sorry. He would take care of everything. He would take care of me. He took care of me, all right. He took my home, my money, my husband's legacy. He siphoned it all away with a labyrinth of legal maneuvers and false sympathies, until I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back and a grief so colossal it had its own gravity. I fell through the cracks of a society that has no safety net for a woman whose entire world has been atomized. The friends faded away, uncomfortable with the raw, bleeding edge of my sorrow. The apartment was sold to pay creditors. I was adrift, and then I was sinking, and finally, I was here, on the street, a specter haunting the periphery of my old life. Seraphina was dead. Only Sophia remained, a name I used because it was the one thing Ronan had not been able to steal from me. It was my mother's name, a secret tucked into my soul. The cold was beginning to seep into my bones, a permanent chill that promised a slow, quiet end. I closed my eyes, trying to summon Alara's face, but the features were beginning to blur at the edges, stolen by time and trauma. This was the true horror, not the hunger, not the cold, but the slow erosion of my love, the most sacred thing I had left. A sob caught in my throat, a dry, painful thing. I was so lost in the desolate landscape of my own memory that I didn't notice the man until his shadow fell over me, long and dark, swallowing the meager light from the street lamp. I flinched, expecting a curse, a kick, or the bored disdain of a security guard. I kept my head down, my matted hair a curtain hiding my face. But he didn't move. He just stood there, a silent, solid presence. I dared to glance up, my eyes taking in the polished leather of his shoes, the clean, sharp line of his trousers. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't hurrying. His stillness was unnerving. Then, he spoke. His voice was low, not unkind, but layered with a gravity that made the air around us feel thick and heavy. It was a voice that carried the weight of difficult truths. "Are you Sophia?" The name, my secret name, spoken aloud in this context, was like a physical blow. My head snapped up, my heart a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. I met his gaze. His eyes were the color of a twilight sky, and in their depths, I saw no pity, no disgust. I saw a deep, unsettling knowing. He was older, with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, and lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and burdens carried. He held my stare, and in that silent exchange, a fissure opened in the frozen tundra of my despair. This was not a random act of charity. This was something else entirely. He knelt down, bringing himself to my level. The city noise, the distant sirens, the hum of traffic, seemed to fade into a dull roar. The world had shrunk to this doorway, to him and me. He held no money in his hand. Instead, he held a small, sealed manila envelope, weathered at the edges as if it had traveled a great distance. "My name is Alistair," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the wind with razor clarity. "I was a private investigator. Your husband, Kalen, he hired me 2 weeks before he died." Time stopped. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I could not breathe. I could not speak. The world tilted on its axis. He extended the envelope. He was afraid, Sophia. He suspected Ronan was embezzling, cooking the books to bleed the company dry. He hired me to find proof. I was still building the case when the accident happened. Alistair's jaw tightened. The pain in his eyes was genuine. After the funeral, Ronan had me discredited, my license suspended on false charges. He buried everything. I've been waiting, watching, for a year. I couldn't approach you while you were still in his orbit. I saw what he did to you. I saw you fall. He pressed the envelope into my numb, frozen hands. It felt like holding a live wire. "This is the proof," he said, his tone grim, final. "It's all in here. The financial trails, the offshore accounts, the forged documents. And the mechanic's report." Kalen was meticulous about his car. He had it serviced the day before they left. The tires were new. There was no blowout, Sophia. His eyes locked with mine, and the truth he delivered next was a nuclear blast that annihilated the last vestiges of my shattered world. The brake lines were cut. The envelope burned in my hands, a radioactive core of truth that was searing my flesh down to the bone. Alistair was gone as quietly as he had come, melting back into the city's shadows, leaving me alone with the cataclysm. I didn't move. I couldn't. The words, "brake lines were cut," echoed in the cavern of my skull, a monstrous refrain that rewrote my entire reality. My grief, a heavy, suffocating blanket I had learned to carry, was suddenly ripped away to reveal the festering, venomous wound beneath. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. My family hadn't been taken by a cruel, indifferent universe, they had been stolen. Executed. For money. A sound tore from my throat, a raw, guttural thing that was part sob, part scream, but had no voice. It was the sound of my soul being flayed. I scrambled back into the deepest part of the doorway, clutching the envelope to my chest like a talisman, like a bomb. My body began to shake, violent, uncontrollable tremors that had nothing to do with the cold. The images flooded my mind, no longer the hazy memories of a tragic accident, but now rendered in the stark, horrifying detail of a crime scene. I saw Kalen's hands, strong and capable on the steering wheel, his brow furrowed in concentration as he felt the first shudder of failure. I saw his moment of dawning horror, the frantic pumping of a pedal that offered no resistance, the desperate wrench of the wheel. I heard Alara's sweet voice, maybe asking a question, maybe singing a song, then cutting off into a scream of tearing metal. And the fire. The fire was no longer an impersonal force of nature, it was Ronan's weapon, his final, cleansing purge. Ronan. His face, the face of the man who had eaten at our table, who had held my daughter on his knee, who had stood as Kalen's best man, swam in my vision. The charming smile I had once found reassuring was now a grotesque mask hiding a reptilian cunning. His feigned grief, his comforting lies, his generous handling of the estate, it was all a meticulously staged play, and I had been the dumbstruck audience, too broken to see the strings. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, that it felt like a physical violation. He had not just killed them, he had defiled their memory. He had made a mockery of our love, our family, our life. He had watched me crumble, had even orchestrated my downfall, ensuring I was too destitute and broken to ever ask the right questions. The days that followed were a blur of gray agony. I found a derelict warehouse by the river, a place where the wind whistled through broken windows and the silence was a physical presence. I didn't beg anymore. The few coins I had collected were meaningless. My existence became centered on that envelope. I would take out the contents with trembling, filthy hands, spreading them on the concrete floor like sacred texts. There were financial statements with amounts that made me dizzy, transfers to numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands. There were photocopied emails between Ronan and a shadowy contact, discussing the permanent solution and the inheritance. And then, the mechanic's sworn affidavit, stating unequivocally that the vehicle's brake lines had been partially severed with a precise, professional tool, designed to fail under pressure. I read them until the words were branded on the inside of my eyelids. In the darkness of the warehouse, with the stench of rot and my own unwashed body filling my nostrils, I let the truth consume me. The immense, passive grief I had carried transformed. It did not lessen, it mutated. It became a black, concentrated rage, a diamond of pure hatred forged in the crushing pressure of this new knowledge. I would lie on the cold floor, curled around the documents, and tears would finally come, not tears of sorrow, but of fury, hot and scalding. They were tears of vengeance. The memory of Alara's laughter was no longer a source of debilitating pain, it was a battle cry. The memory of Kaelin's steadfast love was no longer a ghost that haunted me, it was a shield. I was a ghost, but I was no longer a victim. I was a vessel, and I was being filled with a single, unwavering purpose. Ronan had not just taken my past, he had stolen my future. He had left me for dead in the gutter. But in that gutter, surrounded by the refuse of the city, I found the one thing that could sustain me, the one thing more powerful than despair, the need for retribution. The woman, Sophia, who had been begging for change, was gone. In her place was something else, something taking root in the darkness, waiting for its moment to break through the soil and seek the sun. It was not a person, not yet. It was an intention. It was a promise, whispered to the ghosts of my loved ones in the dead of night, I will make him pay. I will make him see you, in me, before the end. The first step out of the abyss was the most difficult. It required a will I did not know I possessed. The rage was my fuel, but it was a wild, untamed fire that threatened to consume me before I could wield it. I had to learn to control it, to bank it into a steady, relentless flame. I had to become more than my pain, I had to become an instrument of its delivery. Using the last of my begged change, I bought a cheap prepaid phone and a token for a public shower at a homeless shelter. Standing under the spray of lukewarm water, watching the grime of the streets swirl down the drain, felt like a baptism into a new, colder life. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the scent of despair, the feel of helplessness. I looked at my reflection in the cracked metal mirror, a gaunt, hollow-cheeked stranger with eyes that held a terrifying new light. The softness of Seraphina was gone, eroded by hunger and grief. The brokenness of Sophia the beggar was receding. What was left was a sharp, angular face and a gaze of glacial resolve. My first call was to the only person I could trust, a woman from my past life whom Ronan would never suspect. Isolde had been a friend from art school, a brilliant, eccentric soul who lived on a houseboat and made a living restoring antique clocks. She was disconnected from the world of tech and finance, existing in her own realm of gears and pendulums. Her voice, when she answered, was laced with shock and horror as I told her a carefully edited version of the truth, that I was alive, that I had been in a bad situation, and that I needed help, no questions asked. Isolde, bless her unwavering heart, asked for none. She gave me an address, a small, secluded cabin she owned in the woods upstate. That cabin became my monastery, my training ground. For months, I lived in Spartan silence. Isolde brought me supplies, old clothes, and her quiet, steadfast presence. She asked no questions, but her eyes, wise and sad, understood that I was on a grim and solitary path. My body, weakened by months on the street, was my first project. I started with walking through the pine forests, the crisp, clean air scouring my lungs. Then I ran, pushing my screaming muscles until they were strong, until the weakness was beaten out of them. I foraged for food, I chopped wood, I rebuilt my physical self from the ground up, not for health, but for endurance. I was forging a blade, and my body was the steel. My mind was the next crucible. The documents Alistair had given me were my scripture. I studied them until I could recite the account numbers, the transfer dates, the aliases Ronan used. I used the old computer Isolde dug out of her storage, accessing public Wi-Fi from a nearby town library, and began to teach myself what I needed to know. I learned about digital forensics, about shell corporations, about the specific vulnerabilities of the new, proprietary data cloud architecture that had been Kaelin's pride and joy, the very technology Ronan was now profiting from. Kaelin had talked about it endlessly, I had listened with a wife's loving, if sometimes distracted, ear. Now, I focused that memory with the intensity of a laser. I understood the backdoors he'd built in, the failsafes. Ronan, the businessman, would never have the technical depth to find them all. The final piece was the persona. I could not re-enter the world as Seraphina, the tragic widow. Nor as Sophia, the homeless beggar. I needed a new skin, one that could walk unnoticed in Ronan's world. I became Lyra, a freelance data security consultant specializing in legacy systems, a quiet, efficient ghost with a nondescript appearance. I dyed my hair a mousy brown, cut it in a severe, professional bob. I bought functional, anonymous clothing with money Isolde lent me, a debt I swore I would repay 1,000-fold. I practiced a new way of speaking, of moving, of holding my body, confident but unassuming, intelligent but not threatening. The day I finally left the cabin, I stood at the tree line and looked back. The peace of the woods had been a temporary salve, but it was not my home. My home was a grave, and my future was a reckoning. I took a bus back to the city, but I did not return to the streets. I rented a small, sparse room in a neighborhood Ronan would never frequent. I set up my computer. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen. Lyra looked back, her eyes cold and clear. The hunt was beginning. I wasn't just planning to expose him. Anyone could leak documents to the press. That was a distant, impersonal justice. I wanted him to feel it. I wanted to dismantle the empire he had built on the bones of my family, brick by bloody brick. I wanted to take from him everything he had taken from me, his wealth, his power, his future, his sanity. I would become the ghost in his machine, the shadow in his mansion, the truth he thought he had burned away in that fire. The voice of justice was no longer a whisper. It was a silent, gathering storm, and I was its eye. The offices of Valerius Technologies occupied the top 10 floors of a shimmering glass spire, a monument to Ronan's stolen success. From my small room, I could see its peak piercing the sky, a daily reminder of the citadel I had to breach. As Lyra, it was surprisingly easy. I applied for a short-term contract to audit their legacy data infrastructure, a job no one in the shiny, forward-thinking company wanted. My references, carefully crafted with a soul's help, were impeccable. I was hired. Walking back into that world was like stepping onto a stage in a play where I was the only one who knew the script was a tragedy. The lobby was all cool marble and ambient light, the air smelling of money and ambition. I kept my head down, my demeanor that of a competent, boring technician. I saw Ronan once, from a distance, moving through the open plan office with a pack of sycophants in his wake. He was tanned, expensively dressed, laughing at something. The sound was a physical blow, a vile corruption of the laughter that had once filled my home. The black diamond of my hatred grew colder, harder. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I simply filed the image away, another piece of fuel for the fire. My security clearance gave me access to the digital heart of the company. While the other employees worried about stock options and promotions, I was a ghost in the wires, planting my seeds of ruin. I used Kalen's own back doors, the ones he'd shown me with a proud smile, to create a hidden partition in the core server. It became my vault, my control room. I began a slow, meticulous siphoning of funds. Not a grand theft, but a death by 1,000 cuts, tiny, untraceable percentages of large transactions, redirected through a maze of the very shell companies Ronan himself had created. I was using his own weapon to bleed him dry, the poetic justice of it a dark, private pleasure. But money was not enough. I needed to break him. I started a campaign of psychological warfare. An anonymous email to his personal account containing a single, chilling phrase, "The brakes always fail in the rain." I had a child's melody, one Alara used to sing, play from an empty conference room speaker system for precisely 5 seconds before cutting out. I left a single, wilted jasmine bloom, the scent that had filled our old apartment, on the leather seat of his private elevator. I was haunting him. I was making his fortress feel like a prison, his success feel like a prelude to a fall. He became paranoid, erratic. He fired 2 senior executives on a whim, convinced they were betraying him. The stock price began to twitch nervously. The whispers in the industry started. I watched it all from my terminal, a silent conductor of his symphony of ruin. The crescendo came on the anniversary of the fire. The day he had murdered my world. I initiated the final sequence. From my hidden partition, I released a tidal wave of data, every forged document, every embezzled dollar, every incriminating email Alistair. And I had compiled, to every major news outlet, regulatory agency, and shareholder in the company. It was a digital scream that echoed around the globe. Simultaneously, I triggered the financial collapse. The siphoned funds, a colossal sum that had accumulated in the shadows, were instantly transferred to dozens of charities in the names of Kalen and Alara. The company's accounts were left hollowed out, a bankrupt shell. Chaos erupted. The news vans swarmed the glass tower. The trading of Valerius stock was halted. I sat in my small room, watching the live feeds, my heart a still, cold stone in my chest. My final act was the most personal. I walked into his private penthouse atop the tower, using a keycode Kalen had once drunkenly shared with me, a code Ronan, in his arrogance, had never changed. He was there, standing before the floor-to-ceiling window, watching his empire crumble below. He held a glass of amber whiskey, his hand trembling so violently the liquid sloshed over the rim. He looked decades older. He turned as I entered. For a moment, there was only confusion in his bloodshot eyes. The mousy-haired, anonymous Lyra meant nothing to him. Then, I spoke, letting Seraphina's voice, the one he hadn't heard in 2 years, emerge from Lyra's lips. "You should have made sure the fire finished the job, Ronan." Recognition dawned, slow and then all at once, a horrific sunrise of understanding. His face went slack with a terror so profound it was almost beautiful. The glass fell from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. "As Seraphina? No, I was in the gutter," I said, my voice calm, flat, final. I was begging for change. "And a stranger asked me if I was Sophia. He told me you cut the brake lines." I took a step closer, my eyes holding his, letting him see the abyss he had created staring back at him. Kaylin and Alara, say hello. I turned and walked out, leaving him there, utterly and completely destroyed. The police would be there soon for the financial crimes, but I knew, with a cold certainty, that the man I left in that room was already gone. The ghost had won. I walked out into the city, the morning sun warm on my face. The weight was not gone, the grief for Kaylin and Alara would be my lifelong companion. But the rage, the burning need for vengeance, was spent. It had been a toxic, life-sustaining fuel, and now the fire was out. I felt hollow, scoured clean. There was no triumph, only a vast and echoing quiet. I had answered the wound. I had given my ghosts a voice. I was free to finally, truly, begin to mourn. If this story made your heart race or your eyes tear up with justice, don't forget to support this video and keep the voice of silent revenge alive. Comment "Justice wins" if you believe no wound should stay unanswered.